So, welcome back to the next episode of Compliance Rundown. Today, I want to talk about marketing compliance, and particularly, I want to focus on a couple of consent orders that I found in the state of Washington against a couple of lenders. I always find that number one, we look at a lot of times they're just the federal enforcement actions, but I find that looking at state enforcement actions and consent orders can be very instructive as well. The way I look at it has two components. It has a prescriptive component and a non-prescriptive component. So what do I mean by that? Well, prescriptive components are like laws and regulations that provide exacting details of how to apply the rule. So for example, if you're going to quote an interest rate, you got to quote an annual percentage rate. So if you got this, you got that. Pretty clear cut, pretty well instructive. Non-prescriptive is like a law or regulation that provides the principle of what they want, but not exactly the guidance of the requirement. So not the real detail of the requirement. So for example, and we'll see this all the time, advertising cannot be deceptive. Okay, can't be unfair, can't be deceptive. Well, okay, what does that mean? What's deceptive, what's not? Well, it's one of those things that you know when you see it. So it's a little bit harder to get your arms around sometimes. But as a result, looking at these kind of consent orders might be instructive to find out how it's being treated these days. Let's talk about these couple of enforcement actions. In the first, we have a VA lender that really is focused on pushing a VA kind of hybrid ARM loan. So there's another factor, there's another facet there, right? ARM loans have a whole facet in life of marketing compliance in its own right and can create some confusion to consumers if you're not careful. But in this instance, the lender, or the one in the consent order, had basically a YouTube channel, and in their YouTube video, it made claims that the hybrid ARM is the best possible loan for military veterans. There were other statements as well as to why a hybrid loan would always be better than a fixed, or how 95% of the time payment on a hybrid loan is lower than a fixed. Look, I'm not saying that the quality of the statements, I don't know if they're true or not. But the real point here is they couldn't substantiate the points in those statements, the facts in those statements as to why they were true. So I'm not making a judgment call on the statements. I'm not saying I don't like the statements. I'm just saying you got to be thoughtful about them. And in this instance, I think there wasn't enough evidence to support what they were talking about or why those claims were accurate. So you got to back them up. I think that's really what happened and what the state may be considered here. They were also advertising no-cost loans. And I will tell you that no-cost loans can be a somewhat tricky issue. In the state of Washington, by the Department of Financial Institutions, the way they see no cost, they make the assumption that if you have a no-cost loan, basically what you do is you have an above-par rate, and the rebate above that you get from that above-par pricing is just applied to the cost of the loan. So really is a no-cost loan. I think that's their point of their argument. I think that's why they had concerns here. I don't think they could show, meaning the lender, they couldn't show that the no-cost loan was the same as a par rate with cost. So maybe that was the issue here. I don't know. But again, they did get nailed on no-cost loans. And that is a tricky issue sometimes, particularly in the state of Washington. The other issue is superlatives. So like the word, best. We all know you have to be careful about saying we have the best rates. Totally get that. That's pretty much a prescriptive rule in its own right. But the statements they nailed here also were something like, let me see, how about getting you the best possible loan terms? According to the state of Washington, they figured the way that the word best was used in that phrase was a violation. Not sure if I see it, but that's what they found. Getting you the best possible loan terms. Or what about a statement where you're asking, will your current lender give you the best home loan deal available? Our offer is a better deal than your lender can offer. Again, use the word best in there. Again, will your current lender give you the best home loan deal available? Our offer is a better deal than your lender can offer. That one they nailed as well and saw it as a violation and using the superlative best. So it's really kind of tricky. Sometimes you got to think, getting you the best possible loan terms that we can offer. Is that a violation? Is that actionable? I don't know. I'm just going off of what the consent order had in the perspective from the state of Washington. But again, the word best and how it can be used was an issue here. Now, blending advertising. In this instance, what they found was the lender was advertising a streamlined loan where there was no appraisal required, and they were also advertising a cash-out loan. I think the way they read it or saw it, or where they saw maybe the consumers could see it, is that it was a streamlined, no appraisal cash out loan. It's not true. The cash out loan needs an appraisal, apparently. The way it was scripted, I think the state took issue with the fact that it looked like it was blending, conflating products perhaps or ideas, and maybe confusing a consumer. But anyway, that's what they took issue with on this consent order. Now, they also talked about encouraging frequent refinances without mentioning the costs associated with each refinance. So, we still have a benefit of a borrower here thing. So maybe you have to mention the cost because there is a cost in refinancing. And I think that was, again, a concern. There was a gap in understanding the state didn't like here. Then the state of Washington also went on to hit them on prescriptive requirements that you'll find in federal law, like the trigger terms. If you say this, you got to say this, right? They nailed them on pretty much some of those things as well in the enforcement action. All right. That was one enforcement action. The next one, I focused on kind of a couple of things, but particularly improper governmental affiliations. So remember, in advertising, you got to be careful about your nexus between what you do and whether a governmental agency is endorsing you or your product or giving you products specifically to give to the consumer, so on and so forth. So one of the things, for example, and I can see this, one of the examples is where the advertisement itself, begins with WA-VA, meaning maybe Washington-VA or Veterans Affairs, right? So somehow just having that in the advertisement, especially in the beginning, would imply that this was a joint thing between the lender and maybe the VA or something like that. I don't know. They also didn't like certain phrases like equity notice and understanding your VA equity benefit. Equity disbursement loan program and stating limited to VA homeowners and is non-transferable. So kind of giving a very almost exclusive thing for borrowers when in fact it's just a standard VA loan. There was almost call of action, available equity benefit and what you need to do to get it. What's available equity benefit. Again, I think the state took issue in the phrasing of this, suggesting that it was either a very specific government loan program or otherwise endorsed by the VA. Something, again, that states don't like, the federal government doesn't like, but certainly the state of Washington didn't like in this instance. Interestingly enough, there was a lot of information in the advertisement that was consumer specific, meaning loan specific information for that consumer. And that's, I don't think, very hard to do sometimes. If you look at public record, you can see what the loan amounts were that they got in their last loan, so on and so forth. What I think the state didn't like here is it wasn't disclosed as to where that information was coming from. So again, I think they thought it was deceptive that we didn't state that it came from public record or came from the prior lender or it came from some other source, but at least disclose it. I think the other thing I think was some phrasing they didn't like. So to call to accept this, implying that all you had to do to get this offer was to call. Now, there was fine print apparently in the consent order indicated there was fine print on the back saying that you had to have equity and that rates and terms can change, of course, and that kind of thing. But that disclaimer wasn't enough to overcome the assumption that you only had to call to accept, something like that. So I think they had a problem with that. And no surprise, they were also cited for federal prescriptive issues as well. Again, maybe probably trigger terms, and if you say this, you got to say this. Something like that is my guess. Okay. So some final thoughts. Look, in this case, in both these enforcement actions, these happened recently, both appear to be repeats. In other words, if you look at the facts here within the consent orders, they were repeats. So this was something that this lender had done, each lender had done a few times and had warnings, so they took bigger action. So I think in this case, a lot of bad facts triggered the consent order, not just one item. This doesn't mean that, if you do one item, you're not going to have a consent order. But basically in this issue, if you look at it, there were a lot of issues that led to it. So what's the takeaway in this compliance rundown based on what we're seeing, at least from my perspective? If you're going to make very specific statements, like you can close a loan in 12 days or that a hybrid loan is the best for a veteran, you got to be able to back it up and get the documentation, keep it, show it as to we did our math. Here's why we believe we can actually do loans in 12 days or why we really do believe it's best for a veteran. And again, if you can document it, maybe you're okay. But you got to be careful on the broad statements you make. You got to back them up. Now, also, do not allow phrasing in something that can conflate products. It's basically like they said in this instance. You have a streamlined loan with no appraisal, and by the way, cash out. Those are two different things. Maybe you got to make it clear and separate it. Don't conflate them. Don't make it look like it's one product. Look at the ad in the eyes of a consumer. and see if they can be confused about whether the loan is an ARM loan as opposed to a fixed, or about the loan cost, or that you're affiliated with a government agency. Remember, the test here is going to be how a consumer is going to digest, how they're going to read it, not somebody in the industry for 40 years and they kind of know what's going on. It's going to be a consumer who doesn't know the industry. How are they going to read it? You got to read it that way. Watch out for superlative words like best and how you use it, and even in the phrasing. According to Washington, they didn't like certain ways it was used that, frankly, maybe other states might be okay with. I don't know. But it was interesting that they really dug into how they were using best in this instance. Don't forget the prescriptive requirements in federal and state laws as well. That's not really based on subjective opinions as to whether it's deceptive or not, or what it's right. You got to do it. If you do this, got to do that. There's no wiggle room in those requirements. And think about it, fine print in itself, might not save you like you think it does. So something to think about how you use fine print. I don't think there's not a place for it. I think there is the right way to do it. We know that in federal law, they have very specific guidance as to, clear and conspicuous in those certain terms and what that means. So we have to be fair, how we use our fine print as well. Well, that's pretty much it for this compliance rundown. I just thought I would touch on marketing. As you can imagine, marketing compliance has a lot of other things to cover, requirements, both state and federal, and how you do it. But I thought I would just look at these consent orders as a way to kind of get some instruction or thought and guidance of how it's being used today. So hopefully you found that helpful. So thank you for watching Loan Risk Advisors Compliance Rundown. See you next time.